border. Keep in mind, Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, could fix it tomorrow by deploying the Texas National Guard to the border and doing what the federal government won't, but he refuses. The Pentagon spokesman just said thousands of American citizens remain trapped in Afghanistan tonight. He said he didn't know the exact number, that it's just thousands. Many of them can't apparently get to the border because the Taliban control the roads. According to the White House, ISIS is also operating near the airport, but today Joe Biden's flack denied that any of those American citizens in Afghanistan are, quote, stranded.
I think it's irresponsible to say Americans are stranded. They are not. We are committed to bringing Americans who want to come home. We are in touch with them via phone, via text, via email, via any way that we can possibly reach Americans to get them home if they want to return home.
There are no Americans stranded is the White House's official position on what's happening in Afghanistan right now.
I'm just calling you out for saying that we are stranding Americans in Afghanistan.
You know, you've reached a peak lunacy when the Biden administration calls other people irresponsible. Okay. So what should we know about Afghanistan? What is actually happening there right now? Lara Logan is one of the few who does know. She hosts Lara Logan Has No Agenda on Fox Nation. She lived in Afghanistan. She joins us tonight. Lara, thanks so much for coming on. So what should we know? What can we trust about what's actually happening tonight in Afghanistan?
Well, as you know, Tucker, I try to focus on what are really the defining things, right? Because there's a lot of misinformation and propaganda being pushed by the administration and by the Taliban and so on. But what is at the heart and the core? Well, for example, the most important thing that I think Americans should understand is that both this country's enemies and the Biden administration want you to accept that there is nothing that can be done. That this outcome that you see, where the United States, a world superpower, is humiliated, defeated, and shamed on the world stage, that it bows at the knee, takes a knee and bows at the feet of terrorists, that we have to recognize the Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan, that Afghans haven't fought and aren't fighting right now, that there's no resistance. This foregone conclusion, right, is what they want you to accept. Because as long as we're talking and arguing about how many American citizens are left behind and so on, we're not talking about the fact that all of these decisions that brought us here are political. Every single one of them. Yes, there were many failures along the way, but the framework within the generals, operate is a political framework. The commander-in-chief is a politician, not a military man, and they love to remind us all of that. So the political decisions that resulted in this outcome have not changed one bit. There is nothing that is altered. They're not using any of the levers of power in any dimension, not political, not diplomatic, not economic, not security-wise, not military. So you have to look at that and say, well, okay, they're getting the outcome they want, because they could bomb the Taliban into the Stone Age, right? Like that. They could, destroy all those weapons that are in place. They could tell Pakistan to stop, cease and desist right now, or we're cutting off the money and we're putting sanctions on you. They could tell the Qataris, stop doing these big, evacuations of Afghan women, the robotics team and the mountaineering team. When you're funding the Taliban and you finance this invasion, use the levers of your power. And then let's not forget the advanced military technology that the United States military has. I mean, the kind of things, we have thermal drones that can see through walls. Okay. Throughout the entire war in Afghanistan, none of this capability has been used. And so that's a broader question as to why not. But the real question here is, why are we accepting that all of these women in Afghanistan, are condemned to a death sentence, right? And a life of that, all their dreams are obliterated, when we could actually do something about it? The Chinese are they're crowing today. They're all over Xinhua, the state news agency, and they're mocking Joe Biden, they're mocking the United States. And so we are accepting this defeat that puts this country in jeopardy. And the second thing that I think is a defining real question here is we are also accepting the idea that if you criticize this, you're advocating to stay in Afghanistan, and that is false. There are many other options without staying in Afghanistan, and most importantly, this is not just about Afghanistan. This doesn't just empower Al-Qaeda and the terrorists in Afghanistan. It empowers every enemy the United States has. It doesn't just discourage the allies we have in Afghanistan. It tells every nation on earth, we are a terrible ally with friends like us, you don't need enemies. We can't do this alone. For our security globally, we need friends. When we needed help, we went to the Afghans and we said, please help us. And I'll tell you what an Afghan leader said to me today. He said, every meeting with the U.S. began with, we won't betray you again. We won't abandon you again. We made a mistake after the Cold War, and we promise you this time we won't do it. And then the Iranians would come into the next meeting and they would say, America will abandon you again. We are your neighbor. We'll be here when they do. And what you're seeing is the Biden administration proving that every enemy of America and everything they've ever said about this country is the truth.
There's going to be a major realignment, obviously. And I agree with your point that just because you criticize this does not mean you're arguing for another 20 years of occupation. There are other options. Lara Logan, I appreciate your coming on. We have one of the most interesting conversations ever on this subject with Lara on a brand new episode of Tucker Carlson Today for over an hour. You can stream it on Fox Nation, and we hope you will. Lara, thanks.
Thank you, Tucker.
So this show has just obtained exclusively documents that show how the Biden administration is vetting the thousands of Afghans making their way to this country. Pretty shocking. Straight ahead. So we know a lot of Afghan refugees are coming here. How many exactly? Where are they going? How are they being processed when they get here? We have answers to some of those questions tonight. Here's what we've learned from government sources. Dulles Airport right outside Washington is a main welcoming site for flights landing at all hours of the day filled with Afghan refugees. As of this morning, just under 3,700 men from Afghanistan have been processed at Dulles. One recent flight landed there with nearly 200 evacuees. Homeland Security officials are currently discussing opening similar sites at other airports around the country. DHS has also been soliciting volunteers to staff its processing centers overseas. There are currently 3 of those that are vetting refugees in Bahrain, Qatar, and Germany. The administration is planning to open 4 other overseas processing sites. DHS's goal, it says, is to process 10,000 refugees every day at many of these overseas locations. So we reached out to DHS for comment on Friday. A spokesman there said that they are, quote, working around the clock to ensure individuals are screened against U.S. government databases prior to arriving in the U.S. and upon arrival. These are the people who had no idea the Taliban were going to take Kabul in a weekend. What will happen? Well, their attitudes, a lot of good people, but are very different from those of most Americans. A new poll by Pew found that 99% of Afghan Muslims support, for example, enacting Sharia law. So many Republicans in Congress have no problem with this at all. In fact, some of those want us to evacuate Afghans from Kabul before we get all Americans, citizens, out of the country. One of those Republicans, not surprisingly, is Ben Sasse of Nebraska, the single guiltiest white man in America. Sasse said over the weekend that we need to take in as many refugees as possible because America has given its word. He didn't say to whom. J.D. Vance is putting a finer point on that. He's running for Senate from Ohio. He joins us tonight to respond. Now, I don't mean to attack Ben Sasse, but there is this kind of mode of communication that a certain sort of person uses to communicate that rather than explaining why it's in the interest of the country to do something, they just sort of attempt to seize the moral high ground and then lecture you because they have unresolved emotional problems themselves. How do you respond to Ben Sasse's claim that we have a moral obligation to do this?
Well, I'm happy to attack Ben Sasse, Tucker, and if folks want to help our campaign, by the way, they can go to jdvance.com. But look, Ben Sasse speaks in platitudes. There's no substance in what he actually says. So he says that we gave our word. Well, who did we give our word to? Where is this contract that says that we have to take tens of thousands of poorly vetted Afghan refugees at the height of chaos? The person who made that contract, who signed that contract, would be a terrible negotiator. I know that Donald Trump didn't do it. Did Joe Biden do it? Did somebody else do it? Because we should be putting the interests of our own citizens first. And if our government's making promises to other people, to other refugees, then let's be honest about it, but stop with these ridiculous platitudes because they don't actually mean anything unless there's substance behind it.
Like, what are the promises that our government makes to the American public? So 70,000 people die of drug ODs. The FDA made that possible by approving all this poison into rural America. Was that a violation of a promise that our government made us? I mean, what are we guaranteed by the U.S. government? Any idea?
Yeah, exactly. The Constitution really is a compact between our government and our citizens about what the government owes us. And just think about these ridiculous politicians, unfortunately too many Republicans who say things like, well, we want all of these Afghan refugees in our neighborhood. I mean, who really believes that? You cited the Pew Research poll. Another finding from that poll suggests that 40% of Afghan refugees, or excuse me, 40% of Afghans believe that suicide bombing is a reasonable way to solve a problem. Who wants people like that in their community? Of course, 60% of Afghans don't believe that, but when you're not vetting people properly, you're going to get a lot of bad people in your communities. So let's just be honest about the fact that if we want to have a real country, we need to make sure that good people are coming into this country. There are ways to help the Afghans who really did help our military without sending tens of thousands of unvetted people into our country. And the fact that our politicians aren't honest about that trade-off suggests they're either hiding something or they're just stupid. Either way, it's not very good.
Well, they don't care about the details because they don't care about the country. That's, I think, the answer. If you treated your kids like this and sort of anyone could share their bedroom, your kids would know you don't really love them. And I think that we should take that same lesson. J.D. Vance, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
So a senior official at ICE just quit his job because he was told he was not allowed to enforce the law.